John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles continue to practice today. I love when Jim Schwartz talks, John, because you get stuff. He gives you some honesty a lot of times. Sometimes it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes he just tells you like it is. But you learn stuff from him, it seems, when he speaks. And I thought the theme of today's Jim Schwartz press conference certainly centered on his beleaguered defensive backfield, no?
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it. I think Jim understands it. But, you know, when the questions keep coming and they're all cornerback related, I think he gets a little frustrated. But you have to understand where you are with this particular team, and it's going to be this theme throughout the summer. I mean, there's no question about it. It's the one obvious deficiency on this football team right now, and the improvement or the lack of improvement is a daily story, and we'll see pretty quickly because, you know, all of a sudden the preseason games are going to be here, and the Eagles are going to have to start making decisions on whether they have to go outside the organization to try to improve that group.
Yeah, let's dive into that before we dive into some of the things he talked about. Is there a guy right now who's sitting at home that you would say, hey, Howie, how come you're not picking up the phone?
No, not really. I mean, the biggest name out there would be Darrelle Revis, but from a financial standpoint, it doesn't make sense for either side. Darrelle Revis is owed $6 million from the New York Jets, so basically he would be paying for free, and anybody who's followed his career knows he's been the ultimate. You know, NFL players are often painted as losing in contract negotiations. Well, he's the guy who always won, and he's always been a savvy businessman. There's no way he's playing for nothing. So I don't think there's anybody out there that's going to be of significant help right now when the roster is loaded at 90 men.
Can I ask you real quick, John? What about McKelvin? I mean, he was hurt last year. He knows the system. Was he just so bad, or was he a bad person? I mean, are you surprised that they wouldn't consider him?
Well, I think the fact that Leotis is not signed elsewhere, I think, you know, he's had a lot of injury issues. I don't think he's a bad guy, but I do believe the Eagles don't think they can count on him from week to week. I think that was the major issue. If you remember, he hurt his hamstring very, very early, and from that point on, he was kind of hampered. And it was one of those deals that it lingered for much of the year. And I just don't think at his age and the fact that he's got that reputation as a guy who's not going to be there every Sunday, I just think the Eagles wanted to go in a different direction, and they want to give the young guys a chance. And ultimately, when the cuts do start coming and you get down from 90 to 53, and if they do want to go outside the organization, they'll take a younger player who doesn't have that type of injury history. So I don't think it has anything to do with him being a bad guy. It's just they feel they can't count on him.
Yeah, no, and by the way, I wasn't trying to speculate that he was a bad guy. I was asking, is that one of the reasons why the Eagles just say, look, this guy's a troublemaker, we don't want him? Like, for the fact that they swapped him out for Patrick Robinson virtually, I was kind of like, well, they're similar bust or similar disappointments, if you will. Why not just roll with the disappointment you know rather than the disappointment who might surprise you and be lousier?
Yeah, and I think from that standpoint it does make some sense because Jim is comfortable with him and he knows his defense certainly better than Patrick does. So from that standpoint, but a lot of times it's the opposite. It's you do sort of, you're fed up with the devil you do know and you want the devil you don't know. And it might not be a better devil. To this point, it certainly hasn't been because Patrick hasn't performed very well in training camp. But, you know, we're talking about guys who aren't the answer anyway, either of them. I mean, I think that's the bigger issue. If Leotis was still here and playing 16 games and not being injury prone, he's still not good enough. And the same can be said about Patrick Robinson. So I think that's the bigger issue.
John McMullen with us, our Eagles insider, and Jim Schwartz talking today, the defensive coordinator. Now, John, Schwartz seems like a pretty honest guy and kind of tends to tell it like it is, but does he seem concerned with the corner position? Because I know those were a lot of the questions today, and does he seem concerned about his corners?
Yeah, he's very concerned. He's not a dumb guy, and Jim is very, very honest. And you can tell by the way he speaks, it might not be overt, but he does not sort of compliment players that don't deserve compliments. And he will compliment other players. You saw talking about Fletcher Cox a little bit today and how dominating he can be, and how the first thing an opposing offense does is try to scheme to stop Fletcher Cox so he doesn't wreck the game. He will talk like that about players he has a lot of respect for. He mentions, Malcolm Jenkins, Rodney McLeod a lot, and how good they are as a safety duo. He won't say that about any of his cornerbacks. He'll talk in more, we have to keep an eye on it. It's a fluid situation, things like that. And it's because he sees what the rest of us see, and that it's a big concern. And when Jalen Mills, a second-year cornerback who started 2 games last year with a 7th-round pick, he's your Richard Sherman. I mean, that's not good.
And I know that Patrick Robinson came out and made some comments yesterday, and you have an article on our website at 973ESPN.com. Robinson explains his terrible day. What about Jim Schwartz's comments on Patrick Robinson? He said he's 25% of where he wants to be. Where does Schwartz view Patrick Robinson right now?
That's an F, I think, 25%. It's, Patrick has not performed well. He's the first to say it. As I mentioned, he's his own harshest critic. But he is new to this system, and it's still early. Obviously, we haven't even gotten to week 1 of the preseason yet. And it's a process, and it's coming along. And unfortunately, the guy who's supposed to push Patrick Robinson, which is Rasul Douglas, the 3rd-round pick, hasn't necessarily performed well either. So at some point, somebody's got to seize that starting job, and now C.J. Smith might be into the conversation. And if you think about Smith and where he was last year, I mean, he went to North Dakota State with Carson Wentz. We all thought they brought him in just so Carson would feel a little more comfortable. He wasn't even a high priority undrafted free agent. And all of a sudden, he's getting first-team reps.
Yeah, Mike
so
and
I hate to beat a dead horse, as Jim would say, but that's why he keeps getting these questions, because it doesn't look good.
Well, and Mike and I talked about that, about at the corner position, if there was ever a position that you could move up rapidly, and that also is indicative of how poor talent they have at the corner position. But how about a guy that was there but got hurt last year? And that was the one time we talk about Jim Schwartz being honest and almost to a fault. When he was asked about Ron Brooks, his first start of the answer was, boy, we're really sticking on the corner position, aren't we? But what did he have to say about Ron Brooks? Because that's really the backup to Patrick Robinson, at least the way the depth chart looks right now.
Well, no, Ron is not the backup on the outside. He's the starting slot corner, and that's the thing about Ron. He's pretty much just a slot guy. He doesn't move outside the numbers at all. The positive about him, though, is he's been there every day at practice. He's coming off a very, very serious injury. Usually when you have guys like that, they'll give him a maintenance day every once in a while, but he's been able to be out there every single day, and every single day he's been in the first team in the slot. So that's one of the few positive developments, because all of a sudden, not that he's a world beater, but if he's able to be out there, he's a veteran guy who understands the defense and can at least hold down the fort. But he's not in the equation when it comes to starting outside. He just doesn't have the physical skill set to do that. So when you talk about the outside corners, it's Mills, it's Robinson, it's Douglas, it's C.J. Smith, and it's hope and pray Sidney Jones gets healthy.
Yeah, you said the magic name there, Sidney Jones. I know that there's been some comments about him today that came out. What's the latest on Sidney Jones? And everybody keeps saying that name like it's going to be this holy savior that's going to come save the secondary. But how far along is Sidney Jones, and when realistically do you think we can expect him on the football field?
No, I mean, he's a ways away from even being cleared to practice. The original estimation was late September. He underwent his operation in I believe, March 22nd for a torn Achilles. 6 months would put him, and that's the optimistic end of it, would put him at September 22nd. So he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. He's not going to be practicing at training camp anytime soon. But, at some point, as Jim said, he's going to play. The Eagles have no idea what that's going to be, but the minute he steps on the field, he's going to be their most talented cornerback. He's a legitimate first-round talent at a position they don't have a lot of talent at.
Hey, how about a guy that we don't know too much about, and that's C.J. Smith. The press conference was opened today by some positive news that he's had a really good practice. He was working with the ones. He was a guy who intrigued people last year. How far has he come, and is he a factor in this cornerback race, if you will?
Well, he is a factor, and that's what I mentioned. He started getting some first-team reps, but I don't know if that should be seen as a concern or a positive. I think he's getting first-team reps because some of the other guys have struggled so much. And I certainly don't see him as an NFL starting-level cornerback. But somebody's got to play. And the Eagles did a lot of red zone work today, and it's been that way since really the spring, even in the off-season work. They have been a lot better in the red zone than, when they're going the full field. And it makes some sense because if you look at the deficiencies of the Eagles cornerbacks, it generally comes down to recovery speed for all of them. Mills, Douglas, Smith, to a certain degree, Patrick Robinson at his age. And obviously the field is condensed in the red zone, and that's not as big as an issue. So they have performed better when they get into those close quarters. But that's something you do in practice. I mean, when you're playing a real game, you got to play the whole field, obviously.
Yeah. To you, on defense anyway, is there anything close to a story that's as comparable to the mess that is the corner position? Because you did write about Joe Walker.
No, there isn't.
You wrote about Joe Walker, and I know depth at linebacker is an issue, but Schwartz talked about it at the end of the press conference today that, look, putting 3 linebackers on the field, that's an anomaly anymore. We might not even see that anymore. So maybe the lack of depth at linebacker really isn't as big of an issue because you only need 2 guys for the most part. So it seems that there's probably not a story that compares to what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about it for a while. I mean, people call, like Ron Brooks as the nickel corner, as habit, people tend to call him a sub-package player. He's not a sub-package player. He's a starter now because the Eagles are in nickel anywhere from 65 to 70% of the time. The sub-package player is Michael Kendrick, the third linebacker. So, yeah, it's not as important. Jordan Hicks is still working his way back from the broken pinky. He's not been in team drills yet, but they're just being overly cautious with that. When Hicks and Nigel Bradham are on the field, the Eagles are really solid at linebacker. And even Michael Kendricks, he's here. He might not want to be here. That's a pretty good third linebacker. And as you point out, Mike, you're not going to have to play a ton of linebackers. So the depth isn't as concerning as maybe it would have been 10 years ago.
Right.
And that's a similar situation. You could look at the interior of the defensive line. Maybe the depth is not what you want it to be. But Bo Allen will be back at some point. That'll help that. And the safeties are good. And even the backup safeties, Terrence Brooks is probably having one of the better camps and really emerging as the third safety. So that might be a little bit stronger than people envisioned. It really is. I mean, the defense is a really solid unit except for the cornerback position.
So we talked about this yesterday. We were going to ask you this yesterday, but we could not connect with you yesterday, so I'll ask you today. Corners, slightly better, slightly worse, the same, significantly better, significantly worse.
Slightly worse from last year to this point. At least you had the veteran players. Not that Leotis and Nolan Carroll were all that great, but they were competent veteran players at times. And now you just have this youth movement. And I think Jalen has kind of stepped up and embraced the role. I just don't know if he's physically good enough to be what they expect him to be. I think it's a little bit unfair what they're throwing at him. But I don't even concern myself with him. It's after Jalen Mills, and then you just have a bunch of question marks. You really do. Nobody has stepped up and played consistently. Doug Peterson always talks about young players stacking good days together. Nobody's been able to stack good days together. They can't even stack good series together. Guys will make a play here and there. C.J. Smith made a really good play today, but later you'll see him in a different period making a mistake. So forget about days. They have sort of difficulty stacking together good periods in practices. And that's a concern when you don't have that consistency. And Jim talked about that's what they need, consistency at the position, and that's what they don't have.
So, John, is Jalen Mills their best option at corner? Has he separated himself from the rest of the group? And also, second part of that, where do you rank Rasul Douglas?
Yeah, Jalen's been by far their best corner. It's not really been close. Rasul's been a bit of a disappointment since training camp started. He's struggled a little bit. I think the hope was that he would push Patrick Robinson for the right corner position. Hasn't been the case thus far. At some point, though, if Patrick plays as poorly as he has, they might just throw him out there and sort of, throw him in the deep end of the pool and say swim. But it won't be because he earned it, at least until he turns it on and maybe performs better in the preseason. But to date, he hasn't really earned any first-team reps, and he's been on the second team at right corner, and he's struggled, just like most of the corners.
What about, I know you like the Jernigan move. We haven't heard a lot about him, but how's he fitting in?
Yeah, everybody was raving about Tim Jernigan yesterday when they did the live periods. You could just see sort of his explosiveness and the energy he brings. And I think it's going to be fun for the defensive line standpoint because you have two just crazy energy players with Brandon Graham and Tim Jernigan who just go at it 100 miles an hour. So I think from that standpoint, it's going to be fun for the Eagles fans to watch. And that's the other part of it. I mean, they need a good pass rush, and that's why they brought in Tim Jernigan, because they didn't get the interior pass rush they wanted from Benny Logan, and that's the strength of his game is the interior pass rush.
Yeah, and obviously, I don't know where you thought about Fletcher Cox a year ago, but he signed the contract. And if you don't go crazy and, put your name in the all-pro rankings, people criticize you. But Cox and Jernigan as a tandem this year, better than the Logan-Cox tandem from last year?
I do for Jim Schwartz's defense, for what he wants. I think it's a better tandem. Not necessarily a different system. Benny might be a better player because he's a better run defender. But in this particular system, where it's about aggression, it's about shooting the gap, it's about putting pressure on the quarterback, and especially, again, with these corners, I think Jernigan's a much better fit for this. But when you heard Jim talk about Fletcher Cox, I know people get caught up in sack numbers and $63 million, and he should be double digits this, double digits that. What Jim Schwartz said today is completely true. When opposing offenses play the Eagles, they scheme to stop 91 first. And that tells you what kind of player he is.
Well, a lot on the defensive side of the ball today as Jim Schwartz speaks at the NovaCare Complex. John McMullen was there. For all the latest Eagles news and notes, go to 973ESPN.com and follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen, where did it rain up there or something today?
Yeah, we got bad thunderstorms, but after practice, it was nice and hot and humid during practice.
I like that. Nice and hot and humid for you. All right, John, we will catch up. Frank Reich will be speaking tomorrow, and we'll have all of the latest from the Eagles training camp right here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Take care, my friend.
All right, take care, guys. And live periods tomorrow, so get excited. More live hitting.
Get excited.
All right.